Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today, we will begin the book of Yirmiyahu, the Navi prophet Jeremiah. And the reason why I am starting the prophet Jeremiah after reading the book of Zephaniah, I will explain in today's introduction. Those of you that have been keeping up with the podcast until now would know that we have been working our way through the books of the 12 minor prophets. Minor in the sense that they had smaller books, a little slightly less famous, not necessarily less important, just smaller in size. And the books of the 12 prophets were roughly lined up in a chronological manner. We finished the book of Zephaniah, and we learned that Zephaniah started Zephaniah in English, he started his prophecy in the days of the king Menashe, but his main prophecies were said during the time of, at least main in the sense that the ones that were recorded for posterity in his book of Zephaniah, during the days of the king Yoshiyahu. And we pointed out, that's the king Josiah, we pointed out that the king Yoshiyahu, the king Josiah, was the beginning of his reign. The people were continuing in their idolatrous and corrupt ways, which they had been, the path that they had been following during the lives of the king Menashe and the king Ammon. But during Yoshiyahu's reign, he turned the country around and brought about a tremendous revolution and reforms in which he abolished idol worship and tried to bring the people back to the worship of God. Now, so that would mean that Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, whose prophecies began during the days of the king Yoshiyahu, for a significant portion of the beginning of Jeremiah's days, he had good reason to hope for the future of the people of Judah, the people of Yehudah, as he saw Yoshiyahu starting to bring the people on the right path. Unfortunately, that was kind of that revolution did not survive very long, and during the reigns of the descendants of Yoshiyahu, the kingdom of Yehudah rapidly deteriorated until the reign of Tzidkiyahu, who was the final king of Yehudah, who was the king at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem at the hands of the Babylonians, and essentially and was the end of the destruction of the first temple and the exile of the Jewish people from Jerusalem. So Yirmiyahu's entire career spanned from the days of Yoshiyahu, when there was some hope, all the way down to the days of the end and the destruction. And we are going to be reading about this life and process and this life of Yirmiyahu during this book. Today, in terms of verses, I am only going to read the first several verses of the chapter. So this is Yirmiyahu 1a, Jeremiah 1a, just the first portion of this chapter. Just because the first three verses are introducing Yirmiyahu and the timeline, which I just talked to you about. It is likely, in fact, probable that Yirmiyahu was a student of Zephaniah. Certainly he was a contemporary. In rabbinic tradition, it has three prophets that prophesied during the days of Yoshiyahu, all of whom we know well prophesied during the days of Yoshiyahu. Yirmiyahu, who we just mentioned, and we're about to study his book. Zephaniah, who we just mentioned, and we just finished studying his book. And the third being Huldah, the famous female prophetess, who also prophesied during the days of Yoshiyahu. And according to the rabbinic tradition, the three of them worked together in trying to bring the people back to God. And they all had their own missions. According to the rabbinic tradition, Huldah, and they were all from the same school of prophecy, the same school of study. Yirmiyahu, who taught the men in the streets, Huldah taught the women, and Zephaniah taught in the synagogues. who was the synagogue preacher. That's how the rabbinic tradition has the three of them dividing up the labor to teach the people of Yehuda, the people of Judah and Jerusalem, so to speak. Now, there's obviously, we're going to study a lot. Yirmiyahu is a long book. It's going to take us a while. And there's many, many, many lessons to learn. There's several things that I would like to point out in the beginning and in the sense of an introduction that I want you to pay attention to as we read this book of Yirmiyahu. Number one, Yirmiyahu, although we learn a lot of lessons, the primary, it's hard to say the primary lesson, but certainly one of the primary lessons that we learn from Jeremiah is the lesson of resilience. The lesson that no matter what and no matter how many obstacles were placed in front of him, no matter how difficult his job was, no matter how many failures he had to endure, he never, ever stopped his mission. He was probably, in terms of resilience, the most resilient of any figure in the entire Bible, with maybe, I would think, the exception of Joseph. But Joseph, after his many failures, eventually reached a time of spectacular success, whereas in Yirmiyahu, we don't ever really see the time of big success, at least in his lifetime. So resilience is something that I really want to point out in the beginning. And this lesson, that even though Yirmiyahu doesn't specifically tell us to learn resilience, by studying his life and reading his experiences and his teachings, that is probably the most important lesson that we can learn. That when someone has an important mission, something as important as this, and we all have in our lives important missions to accomplish, no matter how many failures and no matter how many obstacles and no matter how much suffering we have to suffer to get there, we should keep on going. Number two, I want to point out that although Yirmiyahu is so well known for his prophecies of destruction, I really would like to point out that and this is true about all the prophets, really, but Yirmiyahu probably brings this point out more than any other. Yes, a lot of Yirmiyahu is fire and brimstone, destruction. He's predicting these terrible, terrible calamities that are going to befall the people if they don't turn their life around, if they don't improve their ways. That is absolutely true. However, the point that Yirmiyahu is trying to make is not just to make predictions of some great apocalypse that's about to happen. He's not this terribly depressed person that simply talks about all the terrible things that are coming down the road. The point is that he's trying to ask the people to repent so that they can avert these terrible decrees. Jeremiah does not want his prophecies to ever be fulfilled. He would wish that his prophecies would never ever come true. This is an extremely important point, and we'll point this out as we study through this book. Yirmiyahu's life's desire was to make sure that his predictions would never ever happen. If it was up to him, the people would learn from their mistakes, improve their ways, and then avert the decree. Yirmiyahu's hope was not that the destruction would happen, but that the King Yoshiyahu would lead a revolution, bring the people back to God, and that would reestablish the kingdom of Judah forever. Another point, number 3, many believe that Yirmiyahu had a similar relationship with the King Yoshiyahu that we saw when we studied Yeshayahu, right, Isaiah, and his relationship with the King Chizkiyahu. Remember that Yeshayahu, Isaiah, believed that the King Chizkiyahu, who also led reforms and brought the people back to God and started and lived his career faithful to God as a righteous king, felt that Chizkiyahu was going to be the one who was going to be the Messiah, so to speak, and lead the people and bring them back to God, and this was going to bring about the ultimate redemption. Yirmiyahu in many ways had similar feelings about Yoshiyahu, who was also a righteous king. To the very end he was righteous, although he made some critical mistakes, which we're going to read about and talk about more as we study this book. But he did remain a righteous king who Yirmiyahu had hopes for would be the one to lead the people to the ultimate redemption. Another point that Yirmiyahu showed a faithfulness to the people of Israel, to his people, the people who he was tasked to lead in the right direction. Yirmiyahu, despite the way the people themselves treated him, his love for the people and devotion for the people never, ever, ever left him. Many of us are often tempted, would rarely be able to suffer so much in order to help others if those others are constantly rejecting you. Usually when we are rejected by a group, we turn away and go somewhere else. But Yirmiyahu's love for the people was so great and so strong that despite the way they treated him, he kept on going. He did not stop. And finally, we see his resilience not only while he's predicting the destruction, while he has so many failures and so much suffering and so on, but even after he sees the destruction, he still doesn't give up hope on the ultimate redemption of the people. Even after he sees the terrible suffering and the terrible destruction wrought by the Babylonian invasion and conquering of Jerusalem and the temple and everything, and the exile of the people, he still had faith that one day they would come back and the people would reestablish themselves, the temple would be rebuilt, and the people would come back to God. These are some points that I want to point out now as we begin the book of Yirmiyahu. And just to begin, I'm going to read the first 3 verses. We're going to learn a little bit about who he was and where he was from. Divrei Yirmiyahu ben Chilkiyahu. These are the words. This book records the words of Jeremiah Yirmiyahu, the son of Chilkiyahu. That was his father's name. Min HaKohanim. He was one of the priests. He was he was a Kohen. He was a priest. Asher ba'Anatot, who lived in the town of Anatot, Be'eretz Binyamin, in the land of Binyamin. This is somewhat relatively close to Jerusalem, the town of Anatot. It is south of Jerusalem. It is there is an Arab village there that has a name. It's like, I think it's Anat or something close to Anatot, which is almost certainly the same town where Jeremiah Yirmiyahu grew up and lived. Asher hayod dvar Adonai elav. This is verse 2. And that the word of God was to Yirmiyahu. When did God speak to Yirmiyahu? When did he get his prophecy? Bimei Yoshiyahu ben Ammon, during the days of the king Josiah, the son of Ammon. We just spoke about that. Melech Yehuda, who was the king of Yehuda. Bishlosh esrei shana lemalcho. He began his prophecies during the 13th year of the reign of Yoshiyahu. That's when Yirmiyahu began to say his prophecies. And we will study soon, when we do Yirmiyahu 1b, the second and the bulk portion and the bulk of chapter 1, we will learn what exactly it was that how God came to Yirmiyahu and what he spoke to him when he began to prophesy. Vayehi, and it was, this is verse 3, Bimei Yehoyakim, during the days of Yehoyakim, that is the Ben Yoshiyahu, the son of Yoshiyahu, Melech Yehuda. In other words, and he continued to prophesy even after Yoshiyahu was killed, after Josiah was killed, Melech Yehuda, the king of Yehuda. He continued during the days of his son, all the way ad tom ashtei esrei shana, until the end of the 12 years of Tzidkiyahu ben Yoshiyahu, of Tzidkiyahu, who was also his son, but was the last king of Yehuda, Melech Yehuda, ad gelos Yerushalayim, until the exile of Jerusalem, the end of the kingdom, B'chodesh HaChamishi, which happened during the month of Av. As we know, today we commemorate the day of the 9th of Av in the 5th month, which is the month of Av. So we say here that just a quick summary of Yirmiyahu's life, and that is when he started his prophecy, and unfortunately he kept prophesying all the way until the end, which was during the days of Tzidkiyahu. Obviously, we're about to start learning about all of this prophecy in detail. This will end Jeremiah 1a. Thank you for starting the study of this incredibly powerful book, and looking forward to continuing to study this book together and studying the entire book of Yirmiyahu together. Thank you.